Good morning and welcome to Sophy Ridge on Sunday. Yes, you're quite right. A month ago, I did say I didn't expect to be back in this seat, but Sophie's taking an Easter break, so I'm off the subs bench. As the Danish proverb goes, prediction is a mug's game, especially when it comes to the future. 4 weeks ago, in the face of Russia's brutal assault on Ukraine, few would have predicted yesterday's astonishing walkabout by Volodymyr Zelensky and Boris Johnson in downtown Kyiv. Here at home, who saw the meltdown of Rishi Sunak's political career coming? With hindsight, making the rest of us pay more tax while his wife elected to pay less tax here doesn't look like smart politics, even if it is perfectly legal. Worse still, the Chancellor has some questions to answer about his own finances, after Sky's Sam Coates revealed that Mr Sunak chose to retain his status as a legal permanent resident of the United States long after he entered Downing Street. So, are we going to follow that Danish advice and avoid looking into the future with our guests this morning? Not a chance. In just a moment, for the government, I'll speak to the Crime and Policing Minister, Kit Malthouse. And we'll get the view from Labour with the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. As ever, it's crucial to hear from voices on the ground in Ukraine, and this morning we'll talk to the Red Cross's Chief of Delegation to Ukraine, Pascal Hundt. And the woman leading the effort to gather evidence of war crimes and build cases against those responsible, sadly, she has much work to do. The Prosecutor General of Ukraine, Iryna Venediktova. Much of the trouble the Chancellor finds himself in is how the focus on his family's tax arrangements and wealth looks when so many people in this country are struggling, sometimes because of the decisions he takes. So we'll speak to Helen Barnard from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation about what it's calling the biggest fall in the value of out-of-work benefits in half a century. Let's start with Crime and Policing Minister Kit Malthouse. Good morning, Minister.
Morning, Trevor.
The Prime Minister's been in Kyiv talking to Mr Zelensky and about providing more weapons. What has he promised, and when can the Ukrainians expect delivery?
Well, obviously, we're funneling as much assistance as we possibly can, both financial and military, into Ukraine as quickly as we possibly can. Yesterday, obviously, there were promises of more equipment, 120 armed vehicles, anti-ship missiles, and that was on top of another 100 million of general equipment. But it's worth bearing in mind, we've also taken measures to assist economically, lifting tariffs on most imports coming in from Ukraine, and also adding another $500 million of loan guarantee through the World Bank to assist Ukraine in its economic welfare as much as possible. And that, of course, is on top of us being one of the biggest bilateral humanitarian donors into the area. We're pulling out all the stops to try and help Ukraine as much as we possibly can. The Prime Minister being there on the street, quite a remarkable moment, actually, that walkabout. Even for me, who's followed the career of the Prime Minister over many years, as you know, I think symbolised the support and the leadership that we're trying to show across the world as we, seek a victory for Ukraine.
We'll come to the issues of sanctions and so forth in a moment, but let's just stick with the military situation, if you wouldn't mind. This morning, we're reading about what look like war crimes by the Russians. What does the latest intelligence tell us about what's happening on the ground, please?
Well, obviously, it's a fast-moving and difficult situation in which the kind of fog of war makes the situation sometimes unclear. As far as we can see, obviously, Ukraine is resisting strongly. The Russians are falling back in particular areas, but it did feel yesterday, coming through, certainly on some of the publicly available information, as if Russian forces were massing for an assault in the east of the country. We're watching very carefully and doing what we can to reinforce the Ukrainian military as much as possible to resist any further attempts by Russia to take their country and to push them back where they possibly can.
So the advice that you're getting, or the intelligence you're getting, forgive me, is essentially that if there is, if you like, a retreat by the Russians, it's in order to regroup and to mount an assault on the east of the country, Donbass and Luhansk, for example.
Well, Trevor, I obviously don't want to, on screen here today, give a sense of what we think may be happening, and therefore may be second guessed by the Russians. As I say, it's a horrible situation. The Ukrainians are fighting bravely, as the Prime Minister said, like lions. We're doing what we can to reinforce them and give them as much weaponry as they possibly can, including anti-ship missiles now, to defend themselves, and if possible, move the Russians off their territory. This is turning into a much longer conflict than I think the Russians calculated for, and much of that is down to the fortitude and the courage of the Ukrainians, assisted, we hope, by the Western munitions that have been pouring into that country, defensive munitions, allowing them to defend their turf.
But of course, I understand your point about not wanting to reveal the West's military hand. But one of the things that we are becoming pretty clearly aware of is that there are war crimes being committed here and allegedly by Russian forces. What exactly are we doing to guarantee that those people are brought to justice at some point?
Well, obviously, that's a matter for the International Criminal Court. And as you will know, the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, has been over to The Hague, I think, to talk to the International Criminal Court about what support we can give them in the pursuit of those who've perpetrated what are quite obviously war crimes during this dreadful conflict. The gathering of evidence during the conflict obviously needs to be done as assiduously as it possibly can, given that it's a conflict zone. And then following any outcome from the conflict, there obviously needs to be pursuit of those individuals. Now, while that is ongoing, obviously we can take action domestically around sanctions that we're able to put on individuals, including combatants, leading generals and others that are involved in it, to signal our, if you like, recognition of their part in this dreadful assault upon a free democratic country. But making sure that the ICC is in a good position to deal with this as soon as they possibly can is where we need to be.
We understand that the Metropolitan Police's War Crimes Unit is involved here. Now, you were yourself responsible for the Metropolitan Police for a while when you were at City Hall in London. Can you tell us what they're actually up to there?
Well, Trevor, I can't, I'm afraid, but they are naturally engaged in gathering as much evidence as they can to offer assistance in the future if they possibly can. I mean, that's an operational matter for the police. They are operationally independent of me and indeed of the government generally. But you can guarantee, Trevor, that as we are putting as much support into the conflict as we possibly can to support the Ukrainians in their fight, we will do the same to bring those to justice who perpetrated some truly awful crimes during this dreadful time.
You have talked about the sanctions we've imposed against Mr. Putin's oligarch friends. We have stopped imports. We've thrown some Russian banks, out of the international banking messaging system, SWIFT. To be honest, though, it doesn't seem to have deterred him at all, does it?
Well, we shall see, Trevor. As you know, these sanctions take time.
His troops are still there.
Yeah, his troops are still there. You are quite right. But as we seek to tighten the sanctions net, as we seek to coordinate with our international partners, particularly in Europe, to restrict the flow of money, if you like, into Russia, particularly from their gas and oil, then that ratchet, if you like, starts to bite much more. Often sanctions take a little bit of time to feed through the financial system, but where we can find gaps, if you like, in our armory of sanctions, we are closing them as quickly as we can. As you know, we legislated very quickly to give ourselves the agility to move, to try and shut down as much of the Russian economy as we possibly can, and we'll continue to do that in the days and weeks to come. You know, these sanctions, I think, will start to bite, if they're not biting already, very significantly in Russia, and we hope that will give Mr. Putin cause to reflect.
Well, I understand the point you're making, that we're trying to essentially put a squeeze on the Russian population by preventing imports and so on. But the truth of the matter is that Mr. Putin's demonstrated he doesn't care that much if his own people suffer. And as long as the Germans continue to buy his gas, as long as the Chinese continue to trade in consumer goods, and as long as India continues to buy oil and weapons from Russia, he's not that bothered. Shouldn't we be focusing more frankly on our friends than on some of the things that we're doing?
Look, we're in constant conversation, Trevor, with all our allies across the world about what more we can do to build a really solid barricade, if you like, against Russian economic activity across the world. Just to say, we have no dispute with the Russian people. This is a dispute with the Russian government led by Mr. Putin, who have ordered this dreadful assault. That's why we've taken measures against his known associates, whether they be oligarchs or others, why we've taken measures against members of the government who strangely have a diaspora across the world.
Forgive me for interrupting you, but I was really asking about our friends here, and we've heard actually from other members of NATO, Poles, for example, and the Ukrainians themselves, that they're pretty disappointed with what the Germans are not doing. Do you think any of our supposed allies and possible friends are effectively letting down this effort and putting a hole in the barricades you just mentioned?
Well, Trevor, look, as I said, we're constantly talking to our friends in Germany and in France and elsewhere in Europe. And in fact, the President of Europe, of the European Commission, as you know, visited Kyiv not very long ago to express her support. And the European Union has taken significant measures. Having said that, we do need to bear in mind that, certain parts of Europe are very dependent on Russian gas. They are taking steps now to wean themselves off. The Germans in particular are looking at what more they can do to bolster their own defense. And of course, Nord Stream 2, that pipeline, which was due to come on stream, has been shut down or cancelled. We are pushing as much as we possibly can for as strong a set of sanctions from the EU and the wider world as we possibly can get. We recognize that this is a ratchet we need to turn as tightly as we possibly can in the cause of freedom in Ukraine. And we will support the Ukrainian president as he repeats those calls across the world.
All right, before we come back to domestic politics, which I do want to talk to you about, do you feel a bit ashamed that our neighbours, the Irish, reckon that they will welcome as many as 40,000 Ukrainian refugees by the end of this month, while we have managed to admit 12,000 of the 70 or 80,000 who would like to come here?
Well, Trevor, you're right. We've had about just shy of 80,000 applications for visas. Of those, we've issued just over 40,000. And of that 40,000, you're right, 12,000 have come to the UK. Now, though the difference between the 40,000 and the 12 might be for a variety of reasons. We know that...
Yeah, but
for a lot...
it's three times... for a country which has a population a fraction of ours. Come on.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. And I know that people are disappointed with the progress of the visa regime. The Home Secretary was out this week expressing her frustration and regret that it hasn't been quicker. But we are motoring now. Now, it's worth saying that while we issue visas to those individuals, there are a lot of people who are in region in Poland and other countries who are in receipt of UK visas, but thinking about their options, preying upon hope that they can return to their country, but in possession of the ability to come to the UK for safe haven if they wish. Now, we are processing as fast as we can. We've now got hundreds of people from across Whitehall working on this. I think we did 1,000 yesterday. We will accelerate during the week, and we hope to get through them as fast as we possibly can.
All right. Well, no doubt my colleagues next time on this programme will check up on that. Let's come back to the cost of living here. You didn't back off on the national insurance rise. Don't need to explain that again. You published an energy strategy this week with a lot of promises about wind power and all the rest of it for the medium term. But I wonder if you could explain what any of that is going to do for families who are going to be faced with a big rise in the autumn when the cap rises, in the context of which, let's remember, a quarter of British families have no savings. A third have less than £100 available to them at any one time. How are those people going to meet that demand for a rise in the cost of energy?
So, Trevor, look, we obviously we recognise that the rise in the cost of living, and indeed fuel in particular, is very tough. Some of that comes from the choices that we've made about supporting Ukraine, some of it from a post-pandemic kind of boom, if you like, or difficulty in supply. We're doing what we can to try and assist in that awful equation for so many people by targeting as much assistance as we can, particularly those who are on a lower income or low paid. So whether that's the warm home discount going to 3 million people, the £9 billion energy rebate scheme that we put in place, there's lots of support going in there. And in particular, worth noting that we doubled the household support fund now to £1 billion targeted at those who will be really struggling and can go to their local authority for assistance. It's worth saying, just on your first question, though, Trevor. I did let you talk.
I did let you to advance Ukraine as an example, but honestly, you put up the national insurance. You have not uprated benefits by more than 3.1%, I think it is now, against an inflation rate now at about 7.7%. These are choices you are making.
You are quite right. These are choices that we're making and that we have to own. So we took a decision that the backlog in the NHS required an investment of £39 billion, and that's what that national insurance rise will raise. But remember, Trevor, that the Chancellor then took the step of raising the threshold, which will come into effect later this year, meaning that 30-odd million people will pay less national insurance as a result. Don't forget also, there is if you like, a suite of tools that will assist people who are low paid. So the national living wage rose, I think, last Friday by 6.6%. We've also increased the taper on universal credit, meaning that those in work and in receipt of universal credit will be better off by £1,000 a year. So when you look at the overall package, we are stretching the financial envelope as much as we possibly can to try and do two things. First of all, to invest in those public services, particularly the National Health Service, but secondly, assist those people who are really struggling with the cost of living as much as we can. Now, these are difficult choices against the backdrop of a balance sheet with a lot of borrowing on it coming out of the pandemic. And I understand that it will be very, very tough for lots of people.
All right, let's talk about your principal decision maker on these questions, the Chancellor. I wonder if he's listening to the many people in this country who are furious that at the revelation that he's raising taxes while his wife made a choice to pay tax not to the country that her husband's asked to make these sacrifices, not to the country that put a roof over her head, but to India. Now, I know it's legal and all that. You don't need to explain that to me. But politically, just a terrible mistake. Massive tin ear here.
Well, first of all, it's worth pointing out that, as Ms. Murthy said, she paid UK tax on all her UK income. But you will have seen her statement. She accepted that there was a sense of disquiet about the situation, and she's moved to correct it. Now, she is a non-combatant in the political fray, but I think both she and Rishi have recognised that situation was not one that was favourable, and it was distracting from the overall message. He's put a huge amount of effort, time, commitment and energy into helping this country get through the last couple of years. And it's unfortunate that his wife has been drawn into this political fray in this way. They've now corrected that situation. Hopefully we can move on.
Well, we can't quite move on because it's not just her, it's him. We now discover, courtesy of my colleague here, Sam Coates, that for the first 18 months as Chancellor, he held a green card, which you will know means legal permanent resident of the United States. Essentially, this also, that means the United States expects him to pay taxes on whatever he earned in the whole world to them first. Now, not good, is it? I mean, this is really, in a time when we want the whole country to trust government and support what it's trying to do, it's not a good look, is it?
Well, look, Rishi Sunak was obviously somebody who
it's
worked
careless,
hard.
At least.
got himself a place overseas at Stanford, got a job there, and required a green card as a result.
Yeah, but that's years ago.
Yeah, but my understanding was, Trevor, that this was a hangover from that time, and that very often people with green cards who don't go to the United States and don't take advantage of it, it just lapses and gets removed. Now, he obviously
but he's not. Come on, Minister. He's not just anybody. He is the Chancellor of the United Kingdom.
I understand, but I don't understand the intricacies of the green card system. But as far as I could see, and as far as I understand, it actually added more complexity and more onerous obligations to him, not less. And it certainly didn't impact on his tax position in the UK, where he was paying tax. But look, it may be worth you in the future getting him on to talk about that stuff. As far as I could see, he took advice from the American officials. He handed his green card back when he was there and regularized that position as well.
Politically, he's toast, isn't he?
No, I don't believe he is. Rishi Sunak has been a remarkable force for good in this country over the last 2 years. He put in place some incredible support schemes during the pandemic at enormous speed. He managed to produce a budget within just weeks of becoming Chancellor. He is a smart, clever, committed politician who has came into Parliament with me, and I've been deeply impressed by him ever since.
OK, Mr Malthouse, I'm sure that Mr Sunak will be glad to hear your reply as he consumes his own toast rather than being it. Thank you so much for your time.
I'm a big fan. Thanks, Trevor. Bye.
All right, now let's get Labour's take on things this morning from Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper. Good morning, Shadow Home Secretary.
Good morning, Trevor.
Now, last week on this programme, your colleague Jonathan Reynolds said that sanctions on Russia have had a significant effect. Oddly enough, the ruble is now worth more than it was before the invasion. Do you think that we need to do more than is currently being proposed by government? We've just heard from Kit Malthouse.
We do support stronger action. We support the action that the government has taken to provide military support for Ukraine to be able to defend itself and to continue to do so. And we also support strong sanctions. And we think we need to be continually looking at where further we can go to put maximum economic pressure on Russia and on Putin's government. That includes looking at individual sanctions. That also includes looking more widely. But we also need to do this in a united way across not just Europe but across the world, because I think it's been that united front that has been really important in addressing this really cruel and vile illegal war from Putin.
Are you worried that that united front is essentially being punctured a bit by the German reluctance to stop gas? We understand how difficult it is for them, but it's not as difficult as it is for the Ukrainian people, is it?
Obviously, it's hugely difficult for the Ukrainian people, and they have shown incredible bravery in the response to this illegal invasion as well, and also in response to war crimes that are taking place and the terrible bombardment. So that's why we do, yes, urge Germany and other countries to really all work together to try and reduce that dependency on Russian oil and gas, and to actually have alternatives, because this is obviously a part of a broader sanctions approach. We have to have the strongest possible action to put the pressure on.
There are things that we can do ourselves, and I want to come to the issue of refugees in a moment, which is your portfolio. But on the question of weapons, Prime Minister's offering a fresh delivery of weapons to Ukraine yesterday. Do you think that we are doing enough on the military and the weapons end of things?
Well, we support the action the government's taken on this, and I think this is an important area. As you say, there are huge differences between us and the government on the support for refugees, where we don't think the government's gone far enough, but we actually support the government on the action that they've taken to provide military support for Ukraine. And it's good, I think, that we've got that cross-party agreement on that, and we're going to have to continue to do so, because this doesn't look like this is coming to a quick end. It's important that some of of Russia's objectives have been frustrated by the bravery of what Ukraine has been doing, but we also know that they are continuing this really horrendous bombardment, and we've seen obviously the cases of torture as well. But I think the issue around the refugee visas is really important. It is shocking. It is just truly shameful, the long delays that we have in getting Ukrainian families visas to come stay with British families who want to host and support them. 30,000 people are waiting for visas. Around half of them have been waiting for more than 10 days. Many of them have been waiting for 3 weeks now, and having filled in all of the forms. This is just disgraceful delays, and I do not understand why Priti Patel is so failing to get a grip on this.
Well, whatever they're doing, one simple way of cutting through this would simply be to drop the visa requirement, as has been the case in countries on the continent. Would Labour support the removal of the visa requirement for Ukrainian asylum seekers, essentially?
We think you should drop the extra bureaucracy. You can simply do security.
Well, I'm asking specifically about the visa requirement.
A kind of
Would
emergency.
you drop that?
Yeah. So we described a kind of emergency visa, which is effectively just the security checks. That's what we need to do. You don't need a lot of this additional visa requirements. For example, to come on the Homes for Ukraine scheme, Ukrainian families are supposed to prove their residence as to where they were living before the 1st of January. So people are uploading utility bills or other kinds of details. That then has to be checked by caseworkers. That then adds to delays. The point about security checks is ministers and officials have themselves admitted you can do them on the spot. You can do them within a matter of hours. So there is absolutely no excuse for these weeks of delays. We should be able to just do this and grant people permission to come pretty much instantly and get those checks done straight away.
So to be clear, an emergency visa is still a visa, but you would only apply one test which you think could be passed within hours about whether somebody's a security risk or not. Do you really believe that?
Yes.
How would you know?
With the
How would you know? Somebody says, I'm not a Russian, I'm not a member of the Wagner Group, I'm not coming to us. How would we actually be able to know that within hours?
These are the standard security checks that we already do. Sort of standard checks with passports and so on. And ministers and officials have themselves said, that security checks can be done online. They've themselves said that these security checks can be done either on the spot. You're effectively checking somebody against a database of wanted criminals. You're checking people in that respect. So those are the kinds of checks that you can do really quickly. And ministers and officials have both admitted that they can do them really quickly. That's not what's holding things up. It's not the security checks. It's the fact that they've added huge amounts of bureaucracy, that they've never got a grip of this. And bear in mind, the Home Office had the opportunity to prepare. They had months to prepare for this. 6 weeks ago, we were urging them to take action, and they haven't done so. Priti Patel wanted to simply use the existing visa system. You remember we had that awful moment when a Home Office minister effectively was saying people should get a seasonal workers visa, perhaps to come and pick fruit. They tried not to set up a proper scheme, and then when they did do so, they added huge amounts of bureaucracy to it. But it's letting everyone down. You have a disabled man, for example, who can't leave Ukraine until he's got his full visa, in a case that I know of. You have mums and kids who are running out of money, and it is shameful. British people want to be generous and want to provide support, and Priti Patel is not letting them.
OK, forgive me for hurrying you up, but we do need to talk about domestic politics a bit. One question, or maybe a couple of questions on this. Your former Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell said in 2019, in the manifesto, actually, that you fought on, that Labour would scrap non-dom status altogether. Is a future Labour government still going to do that?
Well, Rachel Reeves has set up a review of all those sorts of tax exemptions and tax arrangements, and that is underway at the moment. But look, there is a clear issue at the moment, which is why you're asking the question, about Rishi Sunak's household tax arrangements at a time when he has been putting taxes up for everyone, asking everybody else to pay over £1,000 more. His household has had special tax arrangements that allow them to pay less tax attacks. That is just unfair. And that, I think, is why people are so angry about what's been happening, and also the fact that they've just not been transparent about it when there could have been conflicts of interest in place as well.
Well, what everybody acknowledges is that what she has done is perfectly lawful. As far as I understand it, lots of other people do something similar, and you might think that, you know, it's ethical to do something different, but that she hasn't actually done anything wrong. And I'm wondering whether Labour has the view that this perfectly lawful status should now not be available to people.
Well, as I said, Rachel has a review underway, and we have previously proposed reforms in exactly this area. But the issue now is that actually the ethics matter. If you are part of a household where you are asking people across the country to pay more, to put taxes up to a 70-year high, and everybody across the country is really feeling the strain, I don't know how people are going to be managing with the cost of living in lots
Indeed,
of
and
families across the country.
and I asked Mr. Malthouse about that, but the problem is
arrangements in place. I think that is a serious problem.
I understand the point, but it's quite difficult to take the complaint that she should have done something different if you can't say that you would make it unlawful.
So I don't think that's right. I think that ethics do matter when you're in government, particularly as there may be a conflict of interest here as well. So we don't know, for example, whether the Chancellor declared a conflict of interest when he was making decisions on policies. There's some policies reported that do affect non-DOMs, people with non-DOM status. We also don't know what the facts are around some of the reports about whether they've been beneficiaries from tax havens. And we also don't know some of the wider issues about why the Chancellor has had a permanent residence card in the US at the same time as being a member of Parliament and a member of the British government.
And I asked Mr. Malthouse about that.
Those are
I'm interrupting you simply because...
to ask in order to make sure that you don't have a conflict of interest. Sorry, Trevor, sorry.
Forgive me, I'm interrupting you because I know that you want to talk about antisocial behaviour, and I just wanted to give you half a minute to say Labour's got a policy out today to tackle antisocial behaviour by creating police hubs and so on. Why not just more police?
Well, we do think that we need more police, and particularly more police out on the beat in our communities. We had huge cuts to policing, which the government has finally accepted it needs to start to reverse, although there are still fewer police than there were in 2010. But even now, we're still not seeing the police back in the neighbourhoods. It was one of the most important policies Labour had, was to set up neighbourhood policing in our communities to tackle antisocial behaviour. We're at a time when crime has gone up, when prosecutions have gone down, and in many communities, antisocial behaviour is rife and isn't being dealt with. That's why we want to set up neighbourhood police hubs in communities, in towns right across the country to bring together the police, local council officers to tackle that antisocial behaviour that is making people's lives a misery. And we pay for it by saying cancel the royal yacht that neither the Navy nor the royal family want, and use that money to cut crime and antisocial behaviour.
Won't give you many more cops that cancelling the royal yacht, and that's 200 million in 1 year. I've done some arithmetic. It gives you about, I think, 60 police officers in each police force, each of the 43 police forces across England.
So the Royal Yacht Funding would fund the hubs, it would fund the centres. For example, in Castleford, in my constituency, we've persuaded the police and the council to work together to set up a hub. There's another one, Redbridge Council have been setting them up, which are basically a base for local police and councils officers to be based in the community, rather than to be based miles away, to be based locally in the community and to work with the community in hotspots of antisocial behaviour, and to set up neighbourhood prevention teams. What the Conservatives have done is they've just collapsed any of the work on antisocial behaviour. We used to have loads of things going on. They pulled back from it. They've completely decimated neighbourhood policing. We're saying bring back neighbourhood policing and bring back the action on antisocial behaviour as well.
Yvette Cooper, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
It's now thought that more than 50 people were killed by a Russian missile attack on a train station in the east of Ukraine on Friday as they tried to escape the fighting. The situation in the south and east of the country is increasingly desperate as Russian forces focus on the area, with Ukraine saying they're trying to destroy civilians. The Red Cross again sought to reach the besieged city of Mariupol this week as people tried to flee, all as more atrocities are discovered around Kyiv. Now, Pascal Hundt leads the International Committee of the Red Cross in Ukraine and joins us now live from there. Good morning, Mr. Hundt. You're in Western Ukraine this morning. Can you tell us anything about the situation for those who are fleeing the fighting?
Yeah, good morning. Yes, indeed, the situation for those fleeing the fighting, wherever it happens, it's an extremely difficult situation. Fighting is taking place in densely populated area, in cities, and these cities are being shelled, and we have seen the images. These images are really shocking, even outrageous. So you can imagine the level of despair for these people. They're trying to leave, they wait for the train, they are being shelled. So this is really a dramatic situation.
Well, you're referring to the explosion, the missile attack, frankly, on the railway station at Kramatorsk. What are your people there telling you about the aftermath of that?
Many consequences. People are even more in fear and despair. This is one of the problems. They do not dare to take the train anymore, so they are moving by car. They have difficulty to reach the hospital as well. And as I speak, the International Committee of the Red Cross, together with the German Red Cross, we are also trying to facilitate the evacuation of people wounded in the front line. So yes, the situation is even more difficult for the people. They were trying to leave, and this is becoming really difficult. And we see them moving more and more and taking the private cars and moving by roads.
Oh, so people there are now distrusting rail as a mode of travel, which presumably must make evacuation even more difficult and even slower.
I don't know if they are distrusting the railway, but can you imagine you are waiting in a railway station and then the shelling is happening? So they are really afraid. So what we have seen is that some of them were moving by car. Maybe they will try again to reach another railway station and continue to move by train. But I confirm that people continue to flee the area, yes.
You also have teams who have been trying to get to Mariupol. Can you tell us if any of your people actually made it there and whether or not they made it, what you understand has happened there now?
Our team tried for 5 days to go to Mariupol. And it's a difficult journey because you have to cross the front line, you have to go through many checkpoints. Sometimes the people at the checkpoints and the soldiers, they're not aware of your trip. And it's just an illustration on how difficult it gets to have translated into action, the agreement between the capitals and how difficult it is for the order to trickle down at the checkpoint. So we went there with buses, we moved, we try again and again, but unfortunately the situation around Mariupol was too dangerous. The security conditions were not good. The security guarantees we got were not good either. So at around 20 kilometers from Mariupol, we had to go back. We collected people on the road, we collected people in Berdyansk. It was a long journey, difficult journey. Private cars were joining our convoy under the flag of the Red Cross, and finally more than 1,000 people reached Zaporizhzhia. It may sound as a drop in the ocean because the needs are much bigger. The situation is difficult there. People are there with no food, no water, no heating system. So yeah, it's really hell there. So I think many more of such operations will need to take place in the coming days, in the coming weeks. It is urgent, and we really are in contact with the Russian authorities, with the Ukrainian authorities, to ensure that safe passage is being provided to these people so they can move freely and safely to much safer place.
May I ask, the Red Cross itself has come under some criticism internationally and indeed from Ukrainian politicians themselves. In fact, one spoke about it on this programme in previous weeks, saying that you hadn't done enough to protect refugees and that you were too close to Russia to do the job that you're asked to do properly. How do you respond to that?
I think it's a good illustration of the difficulties of being neutral there. You know, many people understand the difficulty of neutrality as of either you are with us or you are against us. And we have heard that many years. And I think neutrality is more than taking side of the victims and doing everything we can in order to be close to the victims. But for doing so, we need to discuss with the parties to the conflict. We need to discuss with the Ukrainian authorities. We need to discuss with the Russians. Ultimately, they are responsible of the behavior of the troops on the ground. They are responsible for providing safety and security to the population, and they are responsible for allowing humanitarian actors to go to the front line, to cross front line. We will continue to do so, but it's a complex endeavor, and we are in discussion with the parties on that.
Well, there's no question about the ICRC's international reputation, but you rightly raise the issue of neutrality. How is it possible to be neutral when it is pretty clear that one side is committing war crimes and seems ready to commit further war crimes?
As long as neutrality is understood as a mean to reach the victim, as a position of defending the victims and being close to them, and as a mean to achieve more protection and assistance, then I think it is easier to understand that. And our neutral position we have positive example of that. It's because of being neutral that we were able to cross front line and to try to go towards Mariupol. It's because we are neutral that we can go to front lines and hot places. So the meaningfulness of neutrality is translating into concrete outcome for the population. And we will continue to do that despite the criticism. But I have to admit that the criticism we faced with respect to not doing enough or to favor one side or the other is also preventing us to work. It is undermining our mandate. It is undermining our access to people. And I hope that this will stop, because this is not helping us to do our work here.
Can you give an example of where that's happened? Presumably you mean that in some circumstances trust has broken down, presumably with Ukrainians in the Red Cross, and that's making it difficult for you to rescue survivors, to provide medical and other help?
And this is not about the Ukrainian authorities with whom we are in contact every day, and they perfectly understand our position. It's more difficult to understand for the public, for the diaspora, where basically they don't understand that we have to discuss with the Russians. So it's a matter of us being better to explain what we are doing, and also in being better in showcasing what we are doing on the ground, and to demonstrate that when people are receiving aid and assistance, this is also due to the neutrality of the Red Cross.
All right, then, if I may just finally ask you about, we talked about Mariupol, and we've seen a lot of what's been happening in the south, but we've also seen some terrible reports of what has happened in the north around Kiev and, for example, in Bucha. What has the ICRC seen there?
We have seen the same image as everyone. We have been in Bucha, in Irpil, in Orgomel. Yesterday we were in Cherniv, north of the country, and we see basically the same image everywhere. And this is truly appalling and heartbreaking. We are discussing with the people there. We find people in total despair. with no food, no electricity, no water, no heating system. They have to go out in the streets to make some fire and cook. I mean, these people were living in horrible conditions. So this is the level of suffering that we are seeing is just immense. And I don't recall having seen that in recent history. We are collecting information. We are discussing with the people. We do our utmost to provide them with assistance. And whenever we see problems, concern, then we discuss as well directly with the Ukrainians and with the Russians on that. This is part of our bilateral dialogue with the parties to remind them of the obligation under the Geneva Convention. And this is complementary to the job that is done by other groups that are becoming vocal on that, journalists that are doing a good job on the ground. And we are complementing this work, and we are discussing with the Russians on that as well.
Mr. Hundt, thank you so much for talking to us this morning.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Now, justice is a word we rightly hear a lot now when it comes to Ukraine. Justice for the victims of the atrocities being discovered, bringing to justice those carrying out alleged war crimes. Videos of bodies in Bucha, accounts of the killing of civilians are prompting huge efforts to gather evidence and build cases that will hopefully hold those responsible to account. But it is a hugely challenging and no doubt hugely affecting task. In Ukraine, that task is led by the country's Prosecutor General, Iryna Venediktova. She joins me now live. Good morning, Ms. Venediktova.
Good morning. Thank you that you are having me.
And I hope I've got the pronunciation of your name correct.
Everything is good. It's Russian surname, sorry.
Say again?
It's Russian surname, sorry. I am Ukrainian Prosecutor General and I have such complicated surname.
Okay.
It's about denazification. It's a very funny thing about when Russians speak about denazification.
Okay, I understand how important that is to you anytime and especially now. So I am this morning going to address you as Iryna, if you don't mind, so I don't get that wrong. What can you tell us about the situation that you are facing on the ground in trying to pursue your task to build evidence and so on?
We have very brutal, aggressive war. And actually what we see now in Ukraine, it's still fighting in eastern part of our country, absolutely brutal and aggressive. Donetsk region, Lugansk region, Kharkiv region are under attack this night. And actually we understand that Russian troops again and again started to took our territory and started to take our territory and to kill our people. And we see this from day and day. You spoke with the chief of Red Cross. Thank you very much for opportunity to listen about Kiev region. For this morning, we have actually number only for this morning 1,222 dead people only in Kiev region. Of course, what we see on the ground in all regions of Ukraine, it's war crimes, crimes against humanity, and we do everything to fix it.
Would you regard, knowing what we know about what happened at the railway station at Kramatorsk, is that a war crime?
Absolutely, it's a war crime. It was a Russian missile which killed more than 50 people. These people just wanted to save their life. They wanted to be evacuated with kids. It was women, it was children, and they just wanted to save their lives. It was.
Do you have any evidence that it was Russian?
Yes, we have evidence. We understand a lot of connections, times, and so on. That's why it will be one of other cases in our big profile. You know that now we started 5,600 cases in Ukraine only about war crimes. We have our anchor case from these 5,600 cases, 02 cases, sorry. And we have our main anchor case where we have 500 suspects. It's a case about aggression crime, aggression Russian Federation against Ukraine. And these 500 suspects, it is the top militaries, top politicians, top propaganda agents of Russia Federation who have done everything to start this war, and they continue this war in Ukraine.
Does that 500 include Vladimir Putin?
Vladimir Putin is the main war criminal of 21st century. We understand it, but from other side, all of us respect of international law, which is implemented in Ukrainian law. We know that 3 positions in national jurisdictions have functional immunity. It is President, Prime Minister, and Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Only this purpose, because they are still on their position, they are not suspects in our criminal case. But actually, we understand when they will not be on their positions, or if prosecutor of International Criminal Court decided to prosecute them, they will be responsible for all their crimes.
So if I understand this correctly, as long as Mr. Putin remains president of the Russian Federation, he has some immunity. But the moment he loses or relinquishes office, he will be vulnerable to prosecution by you.
Absolutely. International practice has such examples. That's why we understand we started all practice of tribunals, all possibilities and cases in international humanitarian law, the practice of ICJ. We see now very young practice of ICC. That's why we understand different strategies how to punish main war criminals, because actually when dictators do again and again do their aggressive, very brutal wars in our modern, in civilized world, it's not normal. It's we as the international community should change maybe instruments, should change maybe mechanisms, and do everything, not only stop and punish. We should to prevent such possibilities of ordinary dictators in the future.
May I ask, you've talked about 5,600 cases. Can you tell us what is the mechanism? How, first of all, how do you know about these cases? And secondly, then how do you pursue them? Because we have a history, of course, of war crimes taking years, even decades, to be prosecuted or to bring people to justice.
Every such case, we have the facts. These 5,600 cases, they are absolutely different by their size. In one case, it could be only one fact of death civilians or to destroy civilian infrastructure. In other case, it could be actually tens or 100 episodes, as what we see with these our 500 suspects. That's why they're absolutely different by size. But it's impossible not to know about this. Almost every region in Ukraine was bombed. And we have a lot of concrete facts in every region, in every city. You mentioned with your previous guest about Mariupol case. More than 40 days, city in blockade. We had a lot of again, facts about war crimes inside Mariupol. We understand it's not only war crimes, it is crimes against humanity, because now only in Mariupol 90% of civilian infrastructure is destroyed. We have other cities in Ukraine, in northern part of Ukraine, in eastern part of Ukraine, as for example Kharkiv, when Russian troops again and again bombed civilian objects, hospitals, kindergartens, schools. Near 1,000 educational institutions destroyed. It is civilian infrastructure without militaries inside. It's not city, sorry, it's town Borodyanka. It's a town without militaries, without military infrastructure at all, but it was bombed and destroyed.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. I know how busy you are, but thank you so much, Iryna.
Thank you very much that you having us here and we can possibility to speak with your audience. And I am very appreciated for all Great Britain citizens and especially for your Prime Minister who was yesterday. It's a really great support for us. And we should stop it, punish and prevent. If we don't do it now, you remember Chechnya, you remember Georgia, you remember Syria, nothing. Now, Ukraine, what will be next? Nobody knows. That's why we should do it now. Very professional, but to do what we should to do.
Appreciated. Whew. We're launching an exciting new programme later in the spring. It's called The Take with the inimitable Sophy Ridge, and it'll be live every Wednesday evening at 9 p.m. And it's a chance for us to take the political temperature midweek and to react to Prime Minister's questions earlier in the day. Sophy will be grilling government ministers and opposition parties, along with backbenchers and others up and down the country. But most importantly, we want to get your reaction. We're searching for a regular panel of Sky News viewers to take part in the programme and share their opinions on the big political issues of the week. If you'd like to be considered, please email The Take with Sophy Ridge at sky.uk with just a couple of lines about yourself and your politics. And there's more information online at news.sky.com. Now, as we've been discussing this morning, the reason the Chancellor's in such trouble over his family's tax and residence arrangement is how all this looks at a time when so many people's finances are being squeezed, sometimes by decisions he himself is taking. Out-of-work benefits will rise by a little over 3% tomorrow, whilst inflation is heading north of 8%. That's a very significant cut in income and living standards for some of those on the lowest incomes in the country. In fact, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation says it will be the greatest fall in the value of basic rate of out-of-work benefits in 50 years. Joseph Rowntree Foundation Director Helen Barnard joins me now. Good morning, Ms. Barnard. Why do you say this is the biggest fall in such a long period?
What we've seen, obviously, is for a decade we've had cuts and freezes to benefits. And actually, for 8 of the last 10 years, the benefits have been losing value. So we're already at a historic low. Now, because although benefits go up tomorrow, they go up by so much less than the cost of living is rising, it means that in terms of their value, so how much bread and milk you can buy in the shops, it is the biggest fall in value since 1972, for 50 years. And obviously people are already very often in quite desperate situations. They are struggling to afford food and heating and basic hygiene products. And now the government is imposing this enormous cut, probably at the worst possible time, given how difficult things are out there in the country.
From your research, can you describe the real-world impact of this to some of the families that you've talked to?
Well, I mean, we're seeing things like pensioners riding the buses all day to keep warm. We're seeing children who are using a torch at night because even at age 6, they know their parents can't afford to turn the lights on all the time. We've heard from food banks who are saying, look, please don't donate fresh food because the people we're helping can't afford to plug the fridge in, let alone cook food. There was a story the other day about a young man, a teenager, fainting at a food bank because he hadn't eaten enough in the run-up. And actually, we're seeing this spread. So people who have been donating and volunteering for years are actually having to say at the end of their shift, have we got any left over? Because I can't afford to eat properly anymore.
I don't know if you had the chance to listen to the Crime Policing Minister, Kit Malthouse, when I spoke to him about, 45 minutes ago, and asked him about this. And he said that, in essence, the government had no choice after COVID and the amount was spent there, the uncertainties for the public finances engendered by the conflict in Ukraine. What's your answer to that case?
I think if you look at the spring statement, the Chancellor spent about £18 billion. That's the money that he decided he could afford to spend. He probably could have spent more and still stayed within his rules, but let's just take the 18 billion. Of that money, about 2/3 went to benefit people in the richest half of the country. So he actually had the money. The issue is that the government is not prioritising using the money they have to protect the poorest people who are facing the greatest hardship.
Your report today is about people who are dependent on benefits, but the squeeze isn't just facing those people, I think. People in work are also facing some drop in their living standards. What does your organisation think is going to happen to those in work, and what will be the impact on them?
Of course, many people at work also get benefits to top up low earnings. So this squeeze on benefits actually affects a lot of low-income workers, as well as people who can't work because they are disabled, or they're caring for small children, or they're caring for adults. So actually workers are going to feel this. And of course, it's this kind of irony that even where you have something like raising the national insurance threshold, which helps some, not all, but some low-income workers, people who are earning little enough that they get topped up by benefit system actually lose a lot of the benefit of something like that, because their benefits get pulled away to make up for the fact that they're keeping a bit more of their income. So actually, I mean, low-income workers are facing incredibly difficult situations. And, you know, we know the majority of people in poverty now are in working households. One of the problems is that too many jobs are not just low paid, but they're insecure. You know, you don't know what money you're getting one week to the next. You don't get sick pay. You don't get protection if something goes wrong. And so it is people who are really vulnerable in that situation when they're working, who are also now struggling to afford, you know, the basic essentials and having to rely on charities for, you know, toothpaste and toilet roll. And, you know, it's humiliating for a lot of people, you know, wonderful as it is that people are helping, to know that even if you're working 2 jobs, you still can't afford to turn your heating on or buy your child a pair of shoes that fit them. That's not a situation anyone should be in.
Helen Barnard, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
That is it for this week's Sophy Ridge on Sunday. In a moment, after the break, we'll run through today's interview and see what we learned in the take. Thank you for joining me on this one-time return for Sunday morning.